Welcome back to the Reptiles and Research podcast. In this episode, we have Heather Moye of Fairytail Dragons LLC. It's a fantastic episode talking about how she's using hybrids to make the perfect bearded dragons as well as blue-tongue skinks, how she's breeding blue-tongue skinks and bearded dragons outside in groups in the Florida weather, how she's using her lines to create stronger and better faring pets for the pet trade, how you can see she's selected for different head types in bearded dragons, and you can really see her signature on a Fairytail Dragons LLC dragon, and you can tell that just from looking at a picture. If you've ever wanted to take breeding reptiles seriously, this is the perfect episode for you. Enjoy the episode. A word from our sponsor. This year we've seen a number of high-profile data breaches, obviously raising serious concerns about personal information security. Dell suffered a breach that exposed 3.9 million customer records, including sensitive personal information. Ticketmaster experienced a massive breach that exposed 560 million customer records. But most alarming of all, just a few months ago, National Public Data announced they suffered a major breach, potentially impacting every American. The incident compromised over 2.9 billion records that were used for background checks, including personal information such as full names, addresses, dates of birth, phone numbers, and most importantly, social security numbers. It has since been confirmed that members of a hacker group released this personal sensitive information online for free. If you haven't been taking your personal information online seriously, now's the time to change that. You are more vulnerable than ever in today's digital landscape. Thankfully, you can feel secure because of today's sponsor. Aura monitors your personal data, including your social security number, across billions of data points like the dark web and public court records, to alert you to potential personal identity theft. They also provide up to $5 million in identity theft insurance should the worst happen. Plus, Aura offers a variety of other features to help you keep yourself safe online, including real-time alerts for data breaches, a VPN for secure browsing, data broker opt-out to stop companies selling your personal information, a password manager to help you store and create strong passwords, and more. So don't leave yourself and your family vulnerable to data breaches. You can go to aura.com/R&R to try 2 weeks absolutely free, and that will give Aura enough time to figure out if any of your personal information has been exposed. It will be pretty interesting to see what companies have got what on you that you didn't even know about, and then you can put a stop to that. Back to the episode. Well, thank you for coming back and joining us, Heather. Your episode that we did last time with you was probably one of my favourites that we've done on breeding. But for those people that may not have heard of you, could you give a quick summary of who you are and what it is that you do?
Okay. Heather Moye, obviously. I own Fairytail Dragons. I've been in the industry now for just over 20 years. So this will be my 21st year for breeding bearded dragons. And I now have expanded into blue-tongue skinks, banana pectinata, frill dragons, worked with a number of species. Obviously, I'm with Ron, so of course Ron St. Pierre, his background is extensive. He has about 40 years in the industry. So he's done a lot of groundbreaking work in outdoor breeding and keeping. So I'm able to utilize those systems. I've been able to learn those systems, and in that experience, learn a lot more about animal behaviors and just a general understanding of the species that I keep, far more than I did when I kept them indoors. So I kind of have a greater understanding of the animals. And there's a lot of eye-opening experiences that I've had over the years. So I've been personally keeping outdoors now since 2019. So this is the 6th year. So, yep.
I think most people are quite shocked at the fact that you're breeding the bearded dragons outside in Florida.
Yeah, initially, so back when Ron was doing it long ago, before I met him, or 30 years ago, and 20 years ago, there was a lot of online chatter online, like on Facebook and stuff. Actually, that was probably more like, 2009 to 2015. And breeders were just constantly chattering, oh, he can't do that. There's no way. They're going to get yellow fungus. They're going to be sick. That's not possible because the humidity is too high. And it was just really that those breeders didn't understand the system and how it worked. So, you know, outdoors is completely different than indoor keeping. Like it is night and day, you know, and I do keep animals indoors as well. But then of course I have the outdoor systems as well. So, but it works really, really well. You just have to understand like your microclimate. You have to understand the environment that you're in. And I mean, you have to select a property specifically for what you do. Or if you're on a property, choose species that will specifically work with that piece of property. If I were to try to put these, if we were to try to put the systems across the street, it honestly, it would be more difficult. It may not work. So the property that we're on, it drains really, really well. It doesn't flood. You know, we have primarily white sand. It's elevated. So I don't, my starting point is not mud, you know, so it doesn't hold water. So if you're combining proper drainage, you know, like quick drain, like I mean, the property doesn't hold water, and then you're able to have proper ventilation, then it's not a problem. And then you're able to mitigate and kind of turn the dials a little bit depending upon what weather conditions that you're experiencing at the time. So during the winter, we use 6 mil plastics to kind of create like a greenhouse effect. And so based on weather conditions, you know, what the lows are going to be, what the highs are going to be the following day, are we going to have a system come in, rain, no rain, all of these things, then we're able to determine exactly how much we roll back or roll down the plastics. So there are days that they don't get vented at all. There's days where it's just like, you know, half an inch venting. And there's other days that we're venting, you know, by a full foot. So you just have to have an understanding of that and how to respond. During the summer months, when we're hitting high temperatures, extremes, and we're hitting like a lot more rain, then we have shields that we put up. So it's making sure that the animals always have what they need to adapt to what other weather condition is occurring.
Did you used to like check the weather constantly? Are you at a point now where you just kind of feel what you think it's going to be like?
Yeah, so when I started doing this, obviously I was learning from Ron. I was learning the systems from Ron, and I had never done it before. So in 2019, like that winter, I was freaked out. I was super nervous. I was super worried. I was having like bad dreams about my animals at night. I was checking the temperatures like crazy. You know, I mean, I was a hot mess. I'm not gonna lie, just because like my personality type is proactive. Um, and so his personality type is reactive. So it's kind of interesting. Sometimes we collide, but it's also a great blend. But because I'm so proactive, my instinct is started like to react to help. So I was constantly checking temps and just like, oh my gosh, are they going to be okay? And then just trying to understand the system, which I mean, it wasn't rocket science. I mean, I caught on, you know, quickly. But yeah, now I can feel like the temperatures outside. I can feel like, oh, the forecast says it's going to be 48 degrees tonight, Fahrenheit, but I feel too much sting in the air. Like the sting is saying that it's going to probably drop lower than that. It might go down to 40 or 42. So, you know, when the forecast comes out and it tells you, oh, your low tonight in your area is 50 degrees, well, yours is still going to potentially be slightly different because of your microclimate. So, you know, you have to go, some of that is on instinct too, not just what the weather tells you, you know. So it could be saying that you're going to get rain and we won't be getting any rain at all. But one of our friends that lives like 20 minutes from here at Isoto or 15 minutes from here is getting pelted, you know. So you just have to really kind of keep an eye on your environment. And yeah, you learn, you get it. You get the hang of it. So, and even just like the different enclosures. So I have some enclosures that are 16 by 4, and I have other enclosures that are 4 by 4. And those are wood with vinyl coated wire bottoms and tops. And then I also have the blue aquaculture tubs that are like 5 by 3. So, and then I have black. So if the different systems also create, you have to kind of tailor how you're venting, what you're doing, how you're setting it up based on those enclosures too. But the most important things are definitely proper ventilation, making sure that there's really good airflow, and then making sure that you're providing proper shelter for the animals to seek, shade or, shelter away from rainy conditions or whatever. So.
And also, you've been doing it for so long. You've got lines of dragons nowadays that are like have been bred to exist in those conditions as well. So it has drifted slightly from what people would expect as well, I'd imagine.
Yeah, my animal, like I honestly was pretty nervous because this year, I say had gotten used to it, but this year, I mean, I was a little nervous, and even honestly, Ron was too, because he said this was the first time in 40 plus years that he'd seen the weather set up the way that it did here for us. Typically in Florida, we see like um, 3 days of trash weather. We'll have a cold front come in and it'll be dreary and gross 2 or 3 days. And then it'll be followed by 10 days of sun, relatively nice weather, during the winter. And then this year it was the reverse of that. This year we were getting like 10 days of like total trash with just like a peak or so of sun. So it was really kind of testing the systems and how well that it would do. And we did end up pulling one night. We ended up pulling the bearded dragons because it was like an extended period of time where we were hitting like the 40s at night and it was gray. Now, keep in mind when you've got the 6 mil plastics, you're still rocketing the temperatures. Even if it's gray outside, you're still getting penetration of the heat from the sun. So some of that is still getting through. So you are going to get the temps up in the enclosures to like the mid 80s, even with temps like that. So anyway, we made the call to go ahead and pull because we had a rain event before and it would drop into the 30s before we would get sun again. So I did pull the dragons for one night, but other than that, they stayed out the entire time and they did great. They did phenomenal. I had no RIs. I had no like everybody was just like, hey, you know. So I was really, really happy with that. And yes, of course, as I continue to keep outdoors, then future generations are becoming accustomed and they're stronger. My animals experience, high heat, low temps, rain events, wind events, changes of season. They're not always just in like this stagnant state of constant spring. So their immune systems are functional and they, are climbing and so they really can handle a lot more than what you think they can. And they've done really, really well. So yeah. So I was really happy with that.
I think the conversation has moved on to such a more nuanced state as well, because it's like if someone's saying, "Oh, bearded dragons can't do that," and it's like, "Well, who's bearded dragons? What has the line been bred for?" You're thinking Viticeps, but are these purely Viticeps anymore? Like, what is the end goal of that line? And it's a completely different conversation now, I think, than what people think it is.
Yeah, and an animal that is raised in conditions that are overcrowded, that are suboptimal, that are really, in an environment for mass production and so on and so forth, their tolerance for such things that I went through this winter would be much, much lower because they wouldn't have like a strong immune system, a really strong immune response. They don't have that. It's like the lab rat, like the lab rat is, it's great as long as it stays in the lab, but as soon as it leaves the lab and conditions are not ideal, then it's a dead lab rat, so yeah, it makes a difference. It's not just the species, it's how they're raised, how they're kept, what you have supplied for them, yeah.
Another question that I wanted to ask you as well. I mean, I think that a lot of bearded dragons have got more barbata and stuff in them than people think they have. Do you think that is a contributing factor of their tolerance of much higher humidity than people think as well?
I think so. I think that just in general, the Veticeps are a lot more tolerant than people have given them credit for in the past.
Mm.
So I think it's just a combination of factors. and the Barbata really, people always talk about, oh, well, we hybridized them and so on and so forth. They hybridized them in the 80s. People just didn't really realize it. When they came into the States, and I have, firsthand knowledge, I have knowledge of this from Ron because he was actually one of the first breeders in the US for bearded dragons and a number of other species like the blue tongues and stuff. So I know, I'm not reading it in a book, I actually know what happened during that time frame, even though I was not yet part of the industry. They were breeding the Rankins, the Barbs, the Viticeps, and when they got an order for bearded dragons, they sent out what they had. So they were all kind of like lumped in there as one. So if a pet store ordered, a 25 lot of bearded dragons, then they might get 10 vets, 10, Rankins, and 5 barbs. You know what I'm saying? So it was like a mixed bag. So they were already hybridized back then, not intentionally. It's not like, it's just that was so in the infancy of everything. There wasn't as much attention placed on that. Plus, I mean, even in Europe, the Vidicans were really popular for a number of years. So that is still has an influence because people go back and then they may take that Vidicans and they're taking it back to a Viticeps. And then, year after year after year, generation after generation, it's taking on more of the traits of the Viticeps, but it was still at one point in time crossed with the Rankins. And you can see influence from these things by looking, like I can look online and see dragons that clearly at some point in time, they were crossed with the Rankins. So, I mean, you see those influences in there that pop up. And it's the same thing with the blue tongues too. People question it's people. I had somebody contact me, for example, about like the Eastern blue tongue, the albino project, right? So I have pure Easterns that I crossed with the Northerns to create the hets, the 100% hets, because I was trying to make a very strong, very viable, healthy animal, right? Because they've been in the United States now for quite a few years, like quite a few years. And to date, nobody had gotten a visual albino on the ground or even hets, to my knowledge. I haven't seen any recording of such. They weren't in the pet industry other than those that had been imported. So I've had people contact me and ask me specifically if I'm going to go ahead and cross like my Eastern albinos to, pure Easterns. And so I told them yes. In fact, I have some paired now for that. But I still, for me personally, I'm still not going to, even though one is known to me as being a pure Eastern albino and one is a pure Eastern, I still am not. I don't want to market them as 100% pure because that all of that can be called into question. Like we don't know. You don't know that albino isn't just one that took on the Eastern traits, that looks more like an Eastern. You don't know that at some point in time, at least yet, right now we don't, until we do like a tremendous amount of genetic testing. But there's no way to guarantee that even though that's an Eastern to Eastern cross, that is 100% pure het for albino Eastern, a pure Eastern. There's no way to do that. So yes, if that pairing's successful, then when I market those, then I'll say that it's from an Eastern pairing, but there's still no way to guarantee, like I'm not going to sell it as 100% guarantee because there's just no way to know. And there's no way for any of us to know definitively on any of our animals that they are 100% pure right now at this point in time. There's just not. So whether it's a blue tongue or a bearded dragon or how many ever other species are out there.
It's just the characteristics that people enjoy that they assign to the thing that they label as what they want it to be. Because like, we're so far away from like when they came from Australia and they've drifted genetically into different lines and been swapped and stuff. Like even the ones that look like that people want them to be, they're still not what they were before because they don't have those pressures. So
Right, right. And then we are influencing by selective breeding and so on and so forth. So we're having an impact on the animals too, as far as visually, what we're creating with the animals. Like some people, back to a bearded dragon, for example, there was a time where a lot of breeders were creating like short snout dragons, and that personally, to me, that drove me bonkers. I didn't care for that because it's kind of like pug in my opinion, and it created like breathing issues, increases the risk of RI, things like that. But that was a thing in like 2010, 2009, 10, 12, right around there, I guess it was. They were being marketed as like a good thing. And so, but that was selectively, those were selected for that. You selectively bred for that trait. So we have an influence on it. As soon as you take it out of the wild and you start breeding it, we have an influence on it and it changes. So whether it's pure or not. Um, but anyway, yeah. And for example, getting back to like the blue tongues, I'll switch back and forth because I do about equal on both now. The blue tongues, for example, the easterns that I crossed to the north, the eastern albinos that I crossed to the northerns for the 100% hets, their offspring, some of them look indistinguishable from a standard northern, and then others have far more eastern traits to them. So then I can select which one that I want to work with. I mean, I could take one that has all of the Eastern characteristics and I could put it back into Eastern, and in a few generations, hello, you know what I'm saying? So that again, that calls into question the purity of anything over, the history of herpetoculture, since we've been doing this, because those things have occurred. Now, having said that, like myself, plus I know other breeders that breed for, like, for example, in the blue tongue, for example, that are working with the mutations, then I do have lines that I keep pure, as pure as I know them to be. I purchase them as Easterns or Northerns or whatever, Aryan Jayas, whatever. But then when it comes to the mutations, then those will be hybridized, or
Different
they'll
lines.
be traits, but I will disclose that. So, because the mutations, those are pets, and we really aren't. I mean, when you're talking about bearded dragons, blue tongues, and most of the other species we're working, like, we as breeders aren't really, it's not really a conservation thing. I mean, I get it. I do. I firmly believe in conservation projects and so on and so forth. And I am 100% for that. And I'm 100% in keeping some lines as absolutely as pure as possible. But these are, at the end of the day, these are pets. You want a very strong, healthy, vibrant, resilient pet that isn't going to have health problems, that isn't going to, pass away on a little kid that has fallen in love with this animal as their pet, or, somebody that, I mean, you just want to make sure that the animal is living the healthiest, longest life that they possibly can. And so for me, the albino project, for example, with the blue tongue skinks, the only way to accomplish that was to cross them into the northerns. That was the only way to accomplish it. We have very, very limited, especially now with more restrictions added. Like, we can't bring in anything even from Europe now, as far as either, Easterns, Northerns, that door has closed for now. So, so whatever we have, we have. And even the Australians, they cross the Easterns, the albino project, the Eastern into the Northerns to make it a stronger, more viable animal. Now, if you were to take a mutation and cross it into something and it didn't work out, well, then obviously you're not going to move forward with that, but if it's a benefit to the animal, it's the benefit to the health of the animal, then that's what needs to happen.
But the thing is, when people are saying, oh, it needs to be pure, unless you have the viability to keep it pure, eventually you're either going to have to outcross to keep that population alive, or it disintegrates into nothing anyway. So eventually you end up making the healthier, bolder pets through necessity.
It bottlenecks. So as far as like from a pet standpoint, why is there an objective to keep it pure? Like, what's the point of keeping the animal pure? Like, that doesn't make any sense. If it's pure, but it's weak, but you can have an integrate or a hybrid and strengthen it and have a very strong, healthy, vibrant animal, why would you not do that? It's a disservice to the pet industry, which is pretty much why we're all here. I mean, we're all keepers. We all love them. And some of us have more interest in, in the kind of the scientific and the purity aspect of it than others. But at the end of the day, I mean, these are going into the market, most of them as pets. And so they need to be strong. They need to be healthy. They don't need to be riddled with problems. When I first got my Eastern albinos in on loan, they were very floppy. They were like, I don't know, they weren't strong. I put them outside. It took about a year for them to really increase their strength. Now I pick them up and they're much stronger. But their setup prior to being here was kind of lacking a little bit in what they needed. It's like people talk about, we're talking about albinos, then the vision, their eyesight. Well, if you put them in, a drawer and you're blasting them with UV, or you put them in a 4x2x2 or a 6x2x2 and you're blasting them with UV, and they don't have the ability to choose how they bask and what part of their body they bask, then that is going to cause vision issues for the animal. My albinos, like my females, when they're gravid, they'll stick their butts out in the sun and they'll shield their eyes. But that doesn't mean that I don't ever see them basking face front. They do, but they don't do it for as long. So they will kind of like put their head, like they'll tuck it like behind like a ramp board, or behind, they'll kind of like scoot into the grass, so that they can shield their eyes. And that allows them to maintain a level of vision, and it also allows them to bask, but it allows them to bask at a level that they feel is safe for them, instead of forcing them and not giving them any options. And that's a lot of times, I mean, we've come like a really, really, really long way in like the last even just few years, since yourself and others have been working more in education. Then keeping has come like a long way from when I first started, like a long, long way. But we still need to make sure that we're thinking about the animal's needs and not just here's UV. Like I still have a tendency for clients, for pet keepers, to try to want to blast the animal with UV. And it's just like, okay, what living thing do you see that lives outside that is always exposing themselves to sun? Like, can you think of any species that is outside all the time, constantly exposing themselves to sun? No. So you see them come out, you see them run out onto the sidewalk like a little lizard or something, they get some sun and then they run into the bush. So what are you providing them that replicates that little bush, so that they can seek the shelter that they need, so they can come out and get the UV, and then they can go and escape from that. So, again, got off on a tangent there, but
the other question the rabbit hole that I wanted to go down was, when we last spoke to you, you obviously many, many years into your projects with the bearded dragons already, you had a system in place and you had an idea in mind, the qualities and the characteristics that you want to select for, and what makes the cut and what doesn't make the cut, and where you want to take things like that. When you're starting fresh, when you just got into your blue tongues, where did you start and looking to get your founder animals? And then what did you look at in those founder animals to make sure that they're the ones that are right for you?
So when you're looking at like the mutations, for example, your choices are pretty limited. Like you don't really have like a huge, there's not an open, there's not 50 animals that you can choose from and just be like, oh, okay. It's like you have the animals that you have, particularly given the set of circumstances that we're under. We can't exactly, there's not large numbers of Eastern albino blue tongues in the United States. There's just not, there's like a handful of them. Well, more than a handful, but not a lot. Especially since they've passed away, people have had them pass away over the years and so on and so forth. So you're already kind of like stuck there and limited choices. So then you just have to pair them up with the strongest, animal that you possibly can to start moving forward from. And then you just work from there. So, characteristics that I'm looking for in them are, no overbite or exaggerated overbite, exaggerated underbite. Like the underbites drive me bonkers. misshapen tails. You just, I don't, you get an idea of what the body type is, and you're just looking for certain traits. And so you're selecting based off of those traits once you get going. But like I said, in the early phases of some of these mutations, you have what you have, and you have no choice. Like my original founding stock with the bubblegum project, which are the Aryan Jayas. I have two animals. There was two animals in the United States. That's it. So that's what I have to work with. So I crossed those two animals for the first 2 years to give me a few more to work with. And then this year now I'm outcrossing. I've started outcrossing projects with those. So we'll see what I get this year. This year was really weird, like I said, for winter. So it's either going to be like a really awesome, season, or it's going to be, it may knock me back. I just don't know yet. We'll have to see what the results of that are and how that impacts just out in the wild. Sometimes if there's a season that is unusually cold or hot or whatever, then that'll impact reproduction. So that's just part of the game when you're keeping outside. So we'll see how it goes. I do see a lot of breeding activity, but anyway. So yeah, so those, the only thing that I could do really is go ahead and kind of create more to make sure that I had enough of a foundation stock, and then just start outcrossing. So my OG animals now, I took one to an anery this year, and I took one to a pitch black northern. So, and that just starts the process. And then I'll selectively hold back from those.
Have you found any project that you've done where you've started off and the results are like, oh god, there's gonna be a lot of work to fix this because of how like the growth rates of the juveniles, or like how weak they come out? And
the albino bearded dragon. I have a few animals on loan to me, and those are a hot mess. So, and the ones that I know of in the United States, most of them have been a hot mess. They've died early. They haven't done well. There's been staggered growth within the clutches. Like real staggered growth. I mean, just not. So that I don't even ever. I don't even. This is the first time I publicly said that I have those animals. I don't even. I won't be making those available for sale for a while. I don't have any visuals now. I mean, I haven't produced babies yet, but yeah, it's going to be a while. Those are a mess. So yeah, those are like disappointing. Those, I had somebody who had acquired them and then was like, uh-oh, what do I do with them? So I did take those on breeder loan, but I let that person know ahead of time, like, this is a tough one. There's going to be loss in this. So that's going to be a little bit of an uphill battle, I think.
So kind of when you have like lines like that, what's your first plan to like outcross to bring in some kind of like all of those good genes that you've produced into other things? Are you just going to pair them and kind of see what they produce?
I held back animals from my own colony to pair with these animals when they're ready for outcross. So I'm going straight for outcrossing. There's no cut corners here. I'm not going to be able to take the hets that I have. I'm not going to take het to het. I can't take a visual to a het. That's not going to happen. So I'm immediately going for the outcross. So yeah, so I have animals that I held back specifically this year to pair with those animals when they're ready. So, and then we'll just see what the results are. I'm going to have to hang on to those. So I'm hoping that my bloodlines, because they have even growth rate, because they, the parents live outside, all of the things, that I'm hoping that's going to give me a really good bump, and that, that will push that project forward and create a healthy animal. So,
how much do you inbreed to like lock in your type? Because if you've done it to the point where you've proven type and it's locked in, when you outcross to the albinos, you should get like a relatively like stable animal. If it's, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I should. Yeah, hopefully. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Because the albinos and the het albinos, there's so much. There's such a staggered growth rate, and there's so many characteristics that I would personally never breed for. I'm like, oh, yikes. But, I feel like that, yes, my lines are strong enough that I'll introduce that I can turn the corner on that, but it's going to take some work.
Yeah, that reminds me of the red monster problem and everyone trying to fix that.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, that's
yeah.
polygenetic though, isn't it? That's a lot harder.
Yes. That line initially came from the US and then it went overseas and it was extensively line bred, like super close line bred. In fact, one of the breeders that was kind of ahead of that project, who actually had that project, he contacted me, and I think it was 2018, I think it was 2018, right around 2018. And he was asking me why he was having so many problems with infertility. And he had animals that weren't breeding and he wasn't getting eggs, or he was getting infertile eggs, or there was like these tiny little jelly beans. And I'm like, dude, you ran your lines like way too close. Like you
didn't really line breed, did he? Just straight inbred.
They were straight. Yes, they were straight inbred. So I try to be, anyway. Yeah.
Just let me say it. It's fine.
Yeah. I try, So what the general public didn't see, and what breeders in the US didn't see if they weren't paying attention, is, so one thing that I do love about the Asian market is they show all of their flaws. They show all of their positives, but they show all of their flaws. So if there's something going on, they ask the questions, they publicly talk about it. Here in the US, like, and it's kind of like shameful to bring up any failure. It's kind of shameful to bring up anything that you're having a problem with. Whereas in the Asian market, they do openly discuss, in their groups and online, if you're a friend with one of them, they'll openly show, hey, this happened, this is my failure, what happened. So I think that's really, that I wish we did more of that. And we're more open and understanding that not everything works out and not everything is perfect, and, and so on and so forth. But anyway, they would share photos of their full clutches when they hatched. And you can go through, like, you can run through Instagram and easily find clutches of red monster babies. And you're going to see like huge variation in them at hatch. You're going to see squatty, short little bodies. You're going to see really short tails, no neck. You're going to see, and then you'll see like maybe 2 or 3 in the clutch that are perfect. So if those perfect ones come back in, but then they're bred together, you're not solving the problem. So there are a few breeders, in the US that are working really responsibly with them. And they're trying to make the long lines stronger. And I am seeing improvements in them. But a lot of that kind of falls apart too. As soon as you outcross it, the intensity of that red, since it's line bred, falls apart to a good extent, like to a really good extent. So it's just one of those things. So
a lot easier when it's Mendelian, like just simple recessives and things like that.
Yeah.
We're doing like a hybrid thing. Well, a secret hybrid thing.
It's when you do, so the intensity of color in a bearded dragon, you pay for that. Like there's a price to be paid for that, to get that like almost that hypermelanistic, like that IMG type of look out of them where they're almost black. Unfortunately, there's a price so far that has to be paid to get that look, and it may not be in that specific animal, but it is within its siblings somewhere. There's a high percentage of animals. Somebody might be like, oh, well, my animal's fine. Okay, but how many animals had to be produced that weren't fine to produce that animal? So
it's the amount of years you're paying to skip. That's the way I see it.
Yeah.
We've got a project that we're planning, and we've mapped it out, and it's like 15 years minimum, and we're like, oh,
I know. Yeah,
painful.
Sometimes you can't take shortcuts.
What were you going to say, Ellie, before I cut you off?
I was just going to say, like, I'm surprised. Well, not really surprised, but there's a shop near us that have red monster babies for sale, and they're nearly $1,000. And like you say, it makes me wonder how many animals behind scenes were produced in order to make those ones that made it to the shop floor. Just kind of sad.
Yeah, and it's not my, like, I'm not going to tell somebody else what price point to assign their animal. Like, that's not my business to do that. So I price my animals the way that what value I place on them and what I feel is fair market. But I have been also a little surprised at the price point on those for, Yeah, it's been a little bit surprising. I mean, some of them coming into the United States initially, they were paying, I think some of them were paying like 4,500 plus for them. A lot, and it's not a recessive mutation. It's not, it's like, okay. Now again, that's just my own personal feeling. I'm not trying to put any negativity out on the project. That's just my own little personal, but I was just like, whoa. um, yeah, it was a
Yeah.
little surprising.
What surprises me is the price of the 50% ones, because they're still a hefty price. And you're like, well, how are you going to get back to that? Because you're either going to have to buy two 50% red, but then you're still going to find it really hard to hit the odds.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be my choice
Yeah.
for if I was involved in that project, which I'm not. If I was involved in that project, that would not be the price point that I would choose. But that's like, again, that's just me. So, and I understand that some of these breeders had enormous investment in the initial animals and things like that. But
So what
Yeah.
drew you to the blue tongues?
I always liked the blue tongues. I just So I always tell like pet keepers, because again, this is about pets. The bearded dragon is like the dog of the reptile community, and the blue tongue is the cat. So when I have somebody trying to decide, do I want a blue tongue or do I want a bearded dragon? Like, what's the differences? And I'm like, dog, cat. Like, really, because the blue tongue, the bearded dragons, have this kind of like almost like where they demand attention. I mean, they come to the glass. They as soon as you come with food, they come running. They'll scratch to get out. They really are constant. They're little attention mongers, which is kind of funny. And I mean, they're really domesticated. They are domesticated at this point. We're so many generations in. They're domesticated. They're nothing like their wild type, and 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 so the blue tongue is kind of, they like to be out, but they also sometimes are just like, I'll do my own thing. But I don't know, I just think they're adorable. They have a really long life expectancy, which I really like and I'm drawn to. I know people that have blue tongues that are like 40 years old, like really old. That doesn't mean they all live that long, but I mean, there are animals out there that, are in their 20s, 32, 17. So I really like that aspect of them. They're easier to care and understand the best basic husbandry as a pet keeper of a blue tongue than it is for a bearded dragon. There's a learning curve with the bearded dragon. They're very, very popular because of their their kind of like their personality traits, as far as what it's the interaction that you feel that you're having with that animal. So they're extremely popular, but there is definitely a learning curve there. I spend a lot of time online talking to or on the phone with my customers on making tiny little tweaks or small changes to their husbandry that makes a big difference, and how the animal behaves and how they're responding and eating and all the things. And the blue tongue is just a much easier setup. The blue tongue is also for my pet keepers. You can go away for a longer period of time and not, it's kind of like leaving a cat at home versus leaving a dog at home. You're able to be gone for a longer period of time. They need fresh water and then you can go. So it's just another species that I'm very drawn to. I think they look like, like they're little potatoes with legs. And I love all of the potential for color and the color palette and patterns. And so there's just, because they are a smoother scale, there's just so much that can be done with them. And of course there's all the mutations. So it's really groundbreaking, well, not necessarily ground, but for the United States, like we're in the infancy as far as the blue tongue morphs. So so far, really, until this past year, there were no US produced albinos available. The ivories have only been out for a few years, 4 years, I guess it is now, maybe. The toffee, which was originally called the patternless, but it's not really a patternless. I renamed them the toffee so they wouldn't be confused with the Tom Neely line of patternless Marukis. But they really they're not something that's available yet. So those are all projects that I'm working on. so that I can get them on the ground so I can start offering them, as pets for people. So there's so much potential as far as color and yeah, it's just nuts. I have 20 years worth of work here without bringing anything brand new in. Like no, easy as far as projects that I want to work on. And so to me, that's very exciting.
I think that's the thing that I've opened my eyes up to lately is like how long it's going to take to do like simple little projects that I have in mind. Versus before, it would be like, right, I want a pair of those, I want a pair of those. I want to just produce those every 2 years and just like keep that pair, almost like a Noah's Ark collection. And then now we've started thinking about our long-term projects and what lines we want to make and like what breeds we want to produce. Suddenly it's like 15-year goals for like one project.
Yeah, and it really is. It is an art form. Like it is an art form,
100%.
But yeah, so my bloodlines with the bearded dragons, like you were saying. I mean, a lot of times people can look at an animal and they're like, "Oh, that's a fairy tale dragon," because they see certain traits. There are certain traits that I breed for. So, yeah, I mean, it really is an art form to create something that is beautiful and healthy and that people are able to enjoy. So pets are important for humans. I think that they're extremely important for, our mental health and throughout history, humans have pretty much always kept pets. And so if I'm going to contribute to that, then I want them to be, healthy and vibrant and beautiful. And, I want somebody to be proud of an animal that they got from me. And so, but yeah, the Blue Tongue project is like really just like on the ground level. As far as in the United States, we had color. We've had color, and breeders have done a beautiful job at developing color, but we didn't really have the morphs weren't really going anywhere. So now, and I feel like we're going to see more and more morphs pop out as we move forward, just like with other species like the crested geckos and so on. It's just like there weren't really any mutations for the crested gecko, and then all of a sudden it exploded. So same thing with the bearded dragon, although we are overdue for one now. So we're definitely overdue for one in the bearded dragon. But anyway, yeah, there's just I love it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff that we spoke to with a lot of people over the last few episodes about the hybrids and stuff, I've like realized how many people are like using hybridization to make better pets, because you hear this like negative cloud of energy of like how it's awful and you're a piece of shit person if you do it because it's not this pure thing. But then you realize how many actual people that are actually doing the good work of making really healthy pets that are ignoring that and just cracking on, and it's just people sat in their little rooms that are like typing away on a keyboard upset about it. And it's so interesting how many people are just actually just making better pets compared to the people that are just complaining about it even though it doesn't affect them.
Yeah, the Blue Tongue community is kind of interesting because, like I was telling you about the pattern list, which I renamed the toffee a couple years ago. That animal it came to me as an IJ Northern. That was already a hybrid, and that animal, there were breeders that purchased that animal in the United States like about 15 years ago, and they were blacklisted for even having the animals. So they wouldn't breed them. They were terrified, like they literally got blacklisted. So that there was threats of that with people that had the albinos, that if they didn't take an albino Eastern to an Eastern, then they would be blacklisted. So again, we get back to like, I understand wanting to keep some lines pure. I get it, like as pure as you possibly can with the knowledge that you have. Again, we still don't know 100% definitively if every animal that we have, I don't care if it looks like a pure Northern or not, you can't say definitively without doubt, without question, that it is 100% a pure Northern, that at some point in time it wasn't crossed with an IJ or with an Eastern in the past. Like you can't say that. Right now we can't say that, right? So I understand the idea of keeping, like I said, I like keeping Easterns. I have some Eastern pairings, Northern pairings. But when it comes to the mutations, my end game is to create a very healthy pet. So yeah, there definitely was a lot of pushback in the past, and even initially, I had some people that were very really frowning upon me crossing them to the northerns. And to an extent, I'm sure there's some people out there that still do. And I understand, and that's okay. And if you don't want to have an animal that is a hybrid or integrate, then I'm okay with that, you know. But there's other people that do. There's other people that prioritize wanting to have a healthy animal over one that is marketed to be pure, you know. So my end game is to produce a healthy animal, and I'm not going to apologize for that. So it's to have a healthy pet, because that's what these are. So, and as long as you are fully disclosing that, then, you know, then you're doing your job, you know. And people say, oh, but, you know, but if that goes out there and then somebody else doesn't fully disclose that, okay, but I can't control the actions of anybody else out there with anything already. So what's to prevent that other person from taking two animals and putting them together that they popped up on Craigslist, or that they got nothing. So that argument doesn't hold for me.
The argument doesn't also hold because if you're that person, you shouldn't be buying ambiguous animals anyway. If you're obsessed with purity, you should be going to the person in your circle that you know has like lineage data back X amount of generations. And if that animal doesn't exist because it was never existing in that pure because no one looked after it, or you don't have track record of your own animals because you're doing it yourself, then what are you obsessing over?
Yeah, I mean, all you can, as a breeder, all you can do is you can be responsible for yourself, your actions, what you're doing, how you're contributing to the community, how you're contributing to the gene pool, the animals that you put out there, disclosing what you have, being honest about what you have, and that's it. That's it. You know, like you can't control anything outside of your own behavior. So, yeah, and like I said, those types of things, like hybridization was happening way, like long ago, anyway, you know, with a number of different species. There wasn't many times there wasn't the like the locale specific type of, you know, that we see nowadays. That just in its infancy, that a lot of that wasn't being done, and it wasn't being done all the time. It was just more like, oh, okay, I have this and I have this and I'm going to cross them, and I have babies and they're both blue tongues or they're both bearded drag or whatever. You know, they're both corn snakes. So, yeah, I mean, the purity and locale stuff, and locale stuff can be called into question anyway, because many
just ends
times,
up being a color morph.
where was it collected? Just because, you know, like where it came out of is not necessarily where the animal was collected. Like imports, for example, when you have an import come in, they can say, oh, well, it's this locale. Okay, it may have the characteristics of that locale, but it may not actually be that locale. It may have been, you know, it may have been caught elsewhere. It may have come from the border of that, you know, in a range where you get some integrates or whatever. So it's just, I don't know.
They end up drifting into a color morph anyway.
Yeah, I understand all sides of the argument. You know, I really do. Like, I understand the purists and I understand their desire to keep things pure. And there's definitely, you know, there's always going to be a market for that. And there's always going to be, you know, a part of our industry that works towards that. And like I said, I myself have animals that I plan on keeping pure, or as pure as I know them to be. You know, but then there's also another segment that is going to work towards, you know, the mutations and, you know, healthy pets and so on and so forth. So that's not to say that the cows or the, you know, the pures would not be healthy, but I mean, you know what I'm saying? So
long term, they won't be.
There's what's that?
Long term, they won't be unless you can actually source more from the wild.
Exactly.
As you're going to have to cross to save the line anyway.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly. Yeah,
it's a weird conversation, isn't it?
That bottlenecking is a thing. You know, it does happen. That genetic bottlenecking absolutely happens. It is a thing, and we are seeing it. And you know, it's definitely a problem. So, how do you overcome that problem without losing the species in captivity if you can't source wild animals? you know?
Yeah, I get it. Like in the States and stuff, if you're like doing a locality of the thing that's in your back garden, right? And you're just swapping
Absolutely.
genetics and you can keep it healthy because you can. But if you're talking about
Yes.
stuff from like Australia, I'm like, what's the point?
That's right, exactly. Yeah. And like going back to the blue tongues, for example, even the Aussies have crossed them and they have those animals in their backyard. But even they were crossing northerns and easterns in their projects. Now they have pure lines too, but they have even used, like I said, the northern into the eastern to create, a more vigorous, larger, more robust animal for the albino project. There are pure albinos, there are pure eastern albinos there, but there are also hybrids that are being produced. So even they are doing that, and they have those animals in their backyard to access and pull, well, you know what I mean? So yeah. And here we're kind of locked with whatever we have. So
I mean, doing this is like the path to domestication, and this is what we've done for thousands of years.
it
And
is.
if that gene is true, the animal gene of like the caretaker and like looking after and like breeding animals, you're also genetically predisposed to walk down this path as well. So for people that are kicking off about it, it's like you're just being upset about being what you are in a weird
Right.
way, you know?
Right. Yeah, I mean, dogs have been, yeah. I mean, pigs, dogs, every species has been, hybridized and worked with for specific traits, and so I mean, that's just part of the problem. That not part of the problem, part of the process in keeping in captivity when you're keeping animals in captivity.
Well, you eventually want to produce animals that fare better and prefer their conditions in captivity over that are like have to make do, but actually
It's
they're so far down the line that it's comfy to them.
right, because if so, like those that have had limited like for example, the bearded dragon, they literally like they'll just Ron laughs sometimes because he's like, good God, these things are so domesticated. Because when I go through for feeding time, like if he's sitting on the sofa and he's watching TV or whatever, and I'm running through and I'm feeding animals, as soon as they see me come with the cup, you hear like rolling thunder. It's like everybody, they all see me coming and they all start running. They get so excited because they're running, because they're like, oh, it's the bug lady, it's the bug lady. So it's really funny. And some of them will actually, like some of them that I keep in like large tubs, with all of their branches and stuff, they'll jump on the edge of the tub and then they'll jump right back when they hit a size that's like kind of like time for me to switch enclosures. But they'll jump up and then they'll jump back into their enclosure. It's hilarious. So I mean, they really are they really are domesticated. But my frill dragons, on the other hand, they are very nervous. They're very skittish. They like to hide in the sticks, so those are going to take a number. They are much more they haven't had the generations and generation after generation of that kind of like socialization and selecting for temperament and stuff that the bearded dragon has had. So they are far more nervous.
Yeah, I would describe them as like really forgiving. Like if I accidentally scare one of my chameleons, I'm like set back for like months. This like, you've made a mistake. A bearded dragon or spook it and be like, oh, but you do have food though, so all right then. And you kind of like, they're so easy to work with because there's very few mistakes that I can make that make them that upset. So they're like such a fun thing to work with because, like I said, they are like a dog. They're kind of like, oh, okay then, it's fine.
Right.
And I never get that with the more, like I say, the more nervous ones, like the chameleons. The
chameleons definitely are very much like that. Yeah.
Kind of
they'll hold it against you forever. Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting to see the and I've even seen generational change like over the years working with the species too. So it's an interesting process to see occur.
I don't know if you saw our last episode with Brian Reeder. I mean, it was like a 4-hour episode, so fair play if you haven't. But he brought up something in that where he's talked about in his research with poultry and the history of their domestication and what he did with goldfish and stuff as well. In every species that is looked at, and him doing it with labs and stuff and looking at the genes and stuff, there is a gene that pops up that changes the adrenal response in response to humans.
I
It
did
says
see that.
you did
Yeah.
see that. So it's
I did.
around
I
sort of
didn't see
F6.
the entire. I didn't see the entire episode, but I did see that part. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't watch the entire thing, but I planned to, but didn't finish.
Fair play.
Yes,
Don't blame
yeah,
you.
absolutely. Yeah, that was very yes. I did see that.
So if F6 and what generation are we on bearded dragons now? Like
Oh God.
long after that.
Oh yeah. I mean, we're 30 plus generations in now. We're like way there.
I mean, corn snakes, for example, we've had corn snakes in the UK for over 120 years.
Mhm.
The earliest records of them saying that you can buy them at the market is 120 years ago. And of course, I don't know how long that was just continuous wild caught before being captive bred. But think about at some point earlier on, there was captive bred success. And how many generations of corn snakes are we in now? Like, even if we said it was every 3 years, I think that is like F30 at the minimum. So there is at some point where you say we're well on the path, if not already on the path to domestication.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because they're just like bearded dragons. And oh, okay. So example, when we ran, for example, the hybrids, because the Barbata are more nervous naturally. They're just generally more nervous. Those animals, their offspring, when you cross them to the vets, were more nervous too. So when you were selecting, like when we did the hybrids with them to try to kind of infuse some new blood into the vets, then there were animals in general, the clutches were more nervous. So, but there were animals that are a little bit less nervous. So you're trying to select for that. So you're creating the evolution there. You're selecting for that trait. So you're pushing that trait forward in what you're producing and what you're working with. So, but yeah, the F1s were pretty nervous.
I think the hobby has been doing it for a while, but subconsciously. But even just breeding for things that will take rodents, that's very much a selective breeding pressure.
It is, yeah.
To eat the food that we're going to provide or you die, right?
Yeah. It is, a lot of it was initially subconscious, but yeah, and when I'm making choices as a breeder, my choices may be different than another breeder. What I'm selectively breeding for, what things that I see that I like in an animal that I feel, contribute to a healthy animal or what I like to see visually may differ slightly from another breeder too. So that's why a lot of times people are able to look at my lines and they'll go, oh, that's a fairy tale dragon, because they see certain characteristics in a lot of them. Not all of them, but you see it kind of across the board in a lot of my animals. I just naturally go towards certain structures, certain builds, certain head shapes, snout, yeah, all of that, tail length, all of that. So
I do feel like every time I find like a really good structured bearded dragon, I'm like, oh, that looks just like Heather's ones, and then I'm like, oh, it is. You have like a really like distinct look to them, and I think if you've got the eye for it, you can really see your signature on them.
Yeah. So like I said, that kind of goes back to art. It's a living art. It really is. So yeah, it is an art form. And you're not the person that's breeding is going to have a certain eye to select things a certain way. They're going to envision it one way, and it may not necessarily match, somebody else. But there are core things that we're looking for. Nobody wants to be, producing animals that have like major underbites or, super short tails or, very, squatty bodies or no neck. Nobody wants to do that. But there are like certain subtle differences that you'll see from bloodline to bloodline just because that's how somebody has selected their animals. So.
And each line will look different from another person's line.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'll see if you've been doing this long enough, you'll see subtle differences in people's lines. You'll be able to pick out somebody's work, if you will.
I think that's where the conversation is going to change, because at the moment you have a lot of people that are like very dogmatic and be like, I know how this species is kept and I'm telling you you're doing it wrong. And it's like the conversation should be moving towards, well, what are your animals like? What's your line like? Because, for example, both I and Ellie have ball pythons who regularly go down to like 50 at night throughout the whole entire winter, go really, really cold, eat throughout the entire winter, bold, outgoing, bomb-proof snakes, right? But if I'm like oh yeah, our snakes can get really, really cold. Our line is actually really, really strong. If we were to proliferate this trait that we've clearly got, you'd have people be like, they can't go that cold. It's going to get an RI. But like, you don't know that the line hasn't been bred for cold tolerance, for example. So it's less of a solid, I know how to keep the species. And it's like, well, what's that line like? Well, what are your animals like? What have they been bred for? And I think that's the future that we're going towards.
Yeah, and it's not just that, which is absolutely valid, very valid point, huge impact, but also it's there's no, I think a lot of times, particularly online social media, people have a tendency to think that there's only one right way to do things, and that's not true. There's many ways to keep an animal, and and have it be have the animal thrive. It's not just one set way. It's not just this way or that's it. You are wrong. So there are, and everybody's microclimate is different too. Everybody lives in a different area of the country. Like even keeping indoors, there are differences that there's different things that I have to teach my clients that live up north versus those that live in the south, because they get storm systems. And even though that animal is inside, they're running their heater far more often. So if they're running their heater far more often, then what's going to happen? Their humidity in their home is dropping. And what room is in it? So, I mean, even small differences as far as what room an animal is being kept in a home versus like what the climate is of where the person's home is. What's the microclimate, versus living here versus across town. I mean, every time I moved, I had to make small dial adjustments to my enclosures, even when I was keeping completely indoors, because my environment was changing a little bit, and so I'd have to tweak it a little bit. Like that's also part of it. And I think people forget that. They think that because they are keeping an animal a certain way and that specific animal is thriving, that there's no other right way to keep them. So I think we need to be more open to conversation and not just automatically say, I'm right, you're wrong, So if somebody is wrong, explaining why that is detrimental to that animal, that particular setup that they have, that particular enclosure with the way that they currently have things, why that's detrimental to the animal, and what little changes that they can make that can make a huge difference and automatically just turn around the animal and have them be thriving, from struggling before. Sometimes it's just a few changes. So, I think as a whole, as an industry, we're doing a better job of that. There for a while, it was getting pretty, where I didn't even want to comment in a group. And I've been doing this a really long time, and I've raised thousands and thousands of animals, and I didn't even want to make a comment for a while. Because everybody was so quick to just like fire back, you are wrong, you can't do that. Just like we were talking about keeping bearded dragons outside. Clearly I can do that. Ron did it for 30 years or whatever. I've had my colony outside since 2019. They go down to 32 degrees. I've had times where they've gone down to 32 and they've done just fine. I've never lost an animal to that. But having said that, I know what I'm doing. I know what to set up for them. They have a greenhouse effect with the 6 mil plastics. They have places they can hide, although it's funny, the bearded dragons usually just sit out in the open, which drives me crazy. They're not the brightest cookies in the cookie jar sometimes, but they have done fine with that. Now, if I were to get to 17, I would be out there pulling my animals. So Ron, when he had his bearded dragon colony, and this was I think it was in the early 2000s, he had a night where they hit 17. And he made sure that they were all in their little subfloors, and they did fine.
I'm just converting this for our European brains. 1 second. 17 is
sorry.
-8, Ellie.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. We'll keep it up. We'll keep it up.
So he literally, his dragons were outdoors in 17, and he didn't lose a single animal. But he was providing everything for that animal to be able to survive. If he had a hidey spot, they were able to go underground basically. Me personally, I wouldn't do that because my nerves couldn't handle it. So when we hit freezing here, 32 Fahrenheit for us, then I would pull, but or below that. But I mean, we have had nights over since 2019 where we've hit 32 and they were fine. There was no issue. So now if we were to hit 32 though, and the next day was going to be complete cloud cover, and we weren't going to rocket up in temperature, and that really wouldn't allow my plastics to work, then I would be pulling. But you really, in Florida, for the most part, we can't get super cold and have no sun. So that combination generally doesn't happen. So typically when we get that low the next day, then we have full sun. But that's what was weird about this year, though. We were hitting like 40s, and then we were having like a lot of cloud cover, which was just like, but I have temp gauges that I keep in the cage. Some of the cages have little temperatures readers, and then I keep an eye on it in the house so I can kind of see what's happening. So in various enclosures.
With your bearded dragons, and you're talking about the growth rate of the clutch in general, have you dialed down sort of like an amount of feeding generally that you're saying to your customers because you know that the growth rate of trait that you've locked in, sort of thing?
So, okay, that's an excellent question. So with feeding, okay, wild type, which I know Beardy Vet and stuff has done a lot of extensive studying on, versus captivity, I think you definitely have some differences there. Between bloodlines, you'll have differences. So to me, like, I don't personally like to assign, like, feed this animal this many bugs this many times a week, and then that's it. My feeding schedule is based on each individual animal. And that is how I feel personally. That's how I teach my keepers to feed, because every animal is a little different. You have some bloodlines that grow really, really rapidly, like right out of the gate, and then they slow a little bit. And then you have others that are kind of a little more steady eddy all throughout the process. So you really have to feed accordingly. So creating like some sort of, arbitrary number where it's just like, this is a baby dragon and it gets 6 bugs a day. Okay, well, how big is the bearded dragon in comparison to the bug? Because in 2 weeks, that dragon will be a little bit bigger. Its tummy will be bigger. And those 6 bugs that were the same size are no longer going to be enough for that animal that's going through, is the animal going through a growth spurt or not? I tell a lot of my, pet people that, it's kind of like feeding a toddler, like a growing kid, like sometimes my daughter was like, she's 13 now, but I mean, sometimes it was like she had a hollow leg, and then other times she really didn't want to eat. So, anything that's going through, that's developing and growing, is going to go through times where it's going to have a little bit higher energy requirement, a little bit higher food requirement than others. So what I've learned is best for the bearded dragon and teaching my customers, because obviously the old school way of give them as much as they want in 15 minutes, creates a lot of obese animals. Is really to kind of think about it as is watch your animal and see what your animal does. Give them 3 bugs, appropriately sized bugs, drop them in. If your animal eats all those, drop in like 2 or 3 more, and then see how your animal reacts. If your animal is still like really like boom, 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 like target feeding hard, then you can continue to feed them a few more bugs. If you see them take a pause and kind of take a deep breath, and they're like, I always tell everybody it's like Thanksgiving, at Thanksgiving dinner, when you're eating, you're just like, you have this plate full of food and you're eating and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I'm full. You kind of like sit back a little bit, you loosen your belt, but then you keep going. Well, the dragons are designed to keep going because evolutionarily they wouldn't know when they would get their next meal. So they overeat. So if you understand that cue, if you understand what that looks like, then you know when to stop feeding at that feeding. So that has helped a lot. That really clicks for my clients, and they understand that. And then they're just like, oh, I got it. Like it makes sense that is the stopping point for that animal. So, and then as and then you're looking for signs if the animal starts just like us, if we start to get a little bit heavy, it's like, oh, I should probably back off a little bit on that, so if you see them start to get, a little bit of the fat pads under, the building there, a little bit of thickness here, and, the beardy boobs and all of that, then you can drop it back before it becomes a problem. So just keeping an eye on your animal, because I don't feed the exact same way out, like all my adults and my babies, they're not getting the same. If they're the same size animal, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're on the same feeding program. My older animals are fed less than my younger animals. Are we in breeding season or not? What's the level of activity during breeding season? My males are hyper and they're all over the place. They're spazzing, so they're going to have a higher fuel requirement. They're going to need more food. Like I said, a baby in a growth spurt or a juvenile in a growth spurt is going to need temporarily more food than one that's not in a growth spurt. So you want to provide them enough. You want them to be satisfied and full, but not stuffed. And so I think it's, rather than giving an assigned number, teaching the customer what to look for in the signals that the animal has gotten enough food, but they haven't passed that point where they're stuffed. Because the dragons will stop. They'll slow down. They won't stop in time, but you'll see this pause. You'll see like this just little bit of a, and they'll just kind of take a deep breath and then they'll keep going. But the speed at which they are bug collecting will drop. That'll be a little slower. They'll be a little slower in it. So that's like your cutoff point, and it works really, really well. That works really, really well.
I feel like you start to learn each individual, because like my male, I know he's had enough when he just thinks about it a little bit too much.
Yeah,
rather than just like diving on it, he kind of wants to look at it. I'm like, well, that's your last one.
Yes. Yeah. So if we slow down, which I mean, pets are supposed to be like a stress reliever for us anyway, and they're supposed to be something that we enjoy, that bring us happiness and so on and so. We should be taking a couple extra minutes with our pets anyway. And if we're taking those few extra minutes and being in that moment, then we should be able to just like literally sit there with them. You know what I'm saying? Like drop those few bugs and allow them to go hunt them, and then drop a few more and watch it and learn those cues instead of just like throwing it in there in a bowl and then running or whatever, So take those couple extra minutes. It doesn't take long and I think it's funny anyway. I mean, I love watching them eat. It's hilarious. So you can learn a lot about your animal just by watching their general behaviors. Just like basking temps too. People always ask, well, what basking temp do I keep? Well, I don't know. It depends on the animal. Every animal is a little bit different. Every bearded dragon is a little different. Every blue tongue is a little bit different. They have a different preferences. So, one may love to bask at 103. One may love to bask at 107. One may like 101. So Fahrenheit. So, you just watch the animal. What is the animal's behavior? Is the animal always basking? If the animal's always basking, then that animal's not getting, the temps need to be bumped up a little bit. If the animal is never basking or spending very little time, then it's too hot, or the animal's not feeling well. So we need to look at this and say, what's going on in this environment, and what changes do I need to make? And people sometimes also, just like between like season changes too. When we go from winter into spring, the temperature in your home starts to change, the ambient changes. So people don't necessarily think, oh, I got to make a change I got to check out my basking temp too, because we're experiencing a change here. So, during the summer here, I mean, we get ridiculously hot. So my babies that are indoors, I have to dial their basking back a little bit because my ambient's higher, because my AC can barely keep up, because it is like, oof, summer here is so yeah, I mean, it really is about watching your animal and learning the cues from each individual animal, as far as what their needs are. Are their needs being met? Are they happy? Basically, are they happy? And just anyway.
How have you found that for the blue tongue skinks? Because they have a bit more of a difficult diet to kind of like control, if that makes sense.
No, it's just cat food, Ellie. It's just cat food.
No, it's not just cat food. Stop it. Their diet is so easy. Oh my gosh, they're very economical to feed, but They're less expensive to feed than the dragons. Their diet is extremely varied. They're basically the trash pandas of Australia. So, they're like the tegu is in South America. They're the trash pandas. So they can just about eat just about anything. But, they're ground dwelling. They'll, grab strawberries off of somebody's bush. They'll, but so with their diet, I'm looking at each individual animal, because some of them have a higher metabolic rate than others. Some of them, are more active than others. How old are they? What's the season? All of that stuff. But then you also have, like for me, because I keep outdoors, I also have something called a wood roach that likes to climb it, that likes to, be in some of the enclosures. So somebody might be getting a few too many wood roaches. So sometimes I have to periodically, like, basically strip that enclosure of all of its substrate and start again to get rid of the wood roaches, because the colony's gotten a little extra, and maybe that animal's decided that they want to partake of said bugs a little much. So that's happened like twice. But anyway, for a keeper that has just like a couple of animals, you can literally, like so I'm offering live bugs to my blue tongues. I'm offering veggies. Occasionally I'm offering like blueberries or banana. Yes, I offer wet cat food and wet dog food, like a high quality. I use Nulo and Wellness Core is what I primarily use. Those are two brands that I like. And so I use that, but I'll also mix it with different things, and I'm always changing it up. So I never pay, I'm never giving them the same thing twice, really. So sometimes I'm mixing in, arugula. Sometimes I'm throwing spring mix in there. Sometimes I'm throwing in peas and carrots. Sometimes I'm throwing squash in there. Sometimes whatever. I mean, I just constantly am changing it up. I also I buy these like bags of organic, freeze-dried black soldier fly larvae that I'll mix in there too. So I'll do that. And so for somebody that's just got like one or two animals, obviously you're not going to go through an entire can of dog food at one feeding. That's just not good. That's not going to happen. So you can use like those silicone freezer trays. So you can mix the foods and then set them up in the silicone freezer trays, and then you can just pop, a serving out, when you're ready for it, and let it thaw out. So that's what a lot of blue tongue keepers do. And then it's like very economical to feed them. Like, and you don't have to feed them live. It is good to feed them live on occasion, but they don't have, they don't have the live diet requirements that like the bearded dragon does. So, I mean, you have to look when you're choosing what species you want to keep. You have to kind of like look at your lifestyle, and you have to look at what experience do I want to have with my animal, and then you're able to determine what species would be best for you.
Almost like snake-like the routine once you got the little icicles, ice pops set up to defrost.
Yeah. Yeah. People order like all different ones, like in shapes of dinosaurs or whatever, and they'll just go ahead and they'll blend it all up, and then they'll set it in the freezer, freezer trays, and then just pop out, a serving when they're ready to feed. So, yeah,
they are really cool. I keep looking at them every time we go past them in like pet stores and stuff, and I'll be like, "Oh, that's the next thing, Ellie."
They're so much fun.
It's always another
They're
snake,
really
but
yeah. They're they're kind of like a cross between a snake and a lizard, really. I mean, so they appeal to, a lot of times people are either snake people or they're lizard people. There's not too many of us that are both. I mean, you have a few, but most people tendency to lean hard towards lizards or hard towards snakes. But almost everybody likes blue tongue. So, but I just don't think that they've never really taken their place, if you will. And that, like, I think they should be way higher in the rankings as far as number of people keeping them. They've never just really taken their place. And that's just occurred due to a number of factors. But, one has been like the lack of morph development in the United States, because morphs push forth look at the crested gecko. The crested gecko community exploded when the mutations came out. The bearded dragon community, every time a new mutation comes out for any particular species, that pushes that species forward. and you have new interest in it because it appeals to somebody else and somebody new. It, grabs our attention because a mutation is kind of like art. When you have an animal that all of a sudden has solid black eyes, or, they're completely solid white, or whatever.
Are they melanistic blue tongues?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Hypermelanistics. Yeah.
I'm in.
I have seen a few. They look really cool.
Is that
They are very
Mendelian,
cool.
or is it just line?
There's a photo of one, or there's a photo of one on my Instagram. Like, you can check it out later. I have het hypermels and I have a hypermel. So I have 2 hets and a visual and a full hypermel. So, but yeah, they're very cool. And you can cross those with the albino to create the lava. So down the road, like I said, I've got 20 years worth of work to do, and I'm like really in no hurry. I'm just having fun with each stage. Some people are like, when are you going to have this? And I'm like, I don't know, whenever I have it. Like, I'm just doing the pairings that call to me, speak to me each year, and then I'll eventually get to it. You can't do it all at once. So
would you say albinism is one of your favorite things to work with?
So that is just such a big key because there's so many combos that work well. Like the albino stacks well with other mutations. So like it stacks well with the melanistic. It stacks well with the you can stack it with a T positive. There's just a lot of different places that you can go, and the albino in itself, you can impact the color of that, like the color palette that I have on the albinos that I produced last year is insane. It's insane. Some of them are these like beautiful pinkish pastel, like just very soft looking in appearance, and others, like I have the one that I named Koi, is just very vibrant and just spectacular. I mean, just like eye popping. And then, I mean, they're all eye popping, and then I have some that are a bit more orange, some that, so, I mean, there's just so much that you can do to develop that and refine that by selecting, like by taking the visuals and putting those into color lines. Like that is going to be huge. That is going to create some phenomenal results that the Aussies haven't really been able to do because they don't have the color palette really. They haven't developed the color palette that we have. So we have some phenomenal red northerns in the States. We have some phenomenal yellows and oranges. So, and then my original hets that I produced, one of the pairings that I did, I took that to a pitch black, which is kind of like an IMG. And the results on the albinos was really popping with that as well. So that was pretty cool. And that's something that they don't have in Australia is the pitch black line. So the results on those are pretty striking. And that actually is why, like, I took my bubblegum this year. We'll see what happens. I paired my original female bubblegum. I paired her with a pitch black. And so I'm interested to see what the visuals will look like, so hopefully this year I'll get the hets. And then once they're ready, I look forward to seeing what the visuals look like on that project.
That sounds really cool. I didn't know that there were like really black ones. I'm obsessed with everything being
there's
black.
2 different, like there's the pitch black line, which really behaves like an IMG. It's an increasing melanin gene. So those develop more black through time. And like I said, I did pop that into one of my some of my albinos. And then the other one is the recessive mutation. So although the non-visuals, you can tell as they age, you can tell that they're het.
Oh, they've got a marker.
They actually are pretty dark. They don't turn. So it's kind of like it's labeled as recessive, but
And what is it in? Is it in the northerns or is it easterns or?
Those are easterns. Now those, they also had to cross for the most, they've done quite a bit, like in Australia with their gene there, then they actually have crossed them. Not everybody did, but most of them did, took them to the northerns because they have a problem with the eyelid. And so in order for that, they have problems with shedding of the eyelids. So they have a tendency to have a tendency towards developing eye infections. And so when they go into shed, it's like that second eyelid doesn't want to shed out. And so then it gets infected and so on and so forth. So in order to get that out, I have to take them to the northerns. So like I have my hets paired to northerns this year. And then I also have my hypermel paired to a northern. So.
And it worked in Australia previously and sorted the eyes out by taking them to northerns.
Correct.
That's cool.
Now some say there's different theories about why that occurs with the hypermel. When you take them to a northern, though, then the problem corrects. Some have said it was a virus, but I feel like if it was actually a virus, then in theory, you would still see it in the northerns. That would cause that to occur. But I think it only shows up in the hypermels. So why that doesn't make any sense to me personally. That doesn't mean that I'm right, but I don't know definitively. But
no, that makes sense.
There's two theories to that, and I don't have enough experience with working with the gene to be able to tell you definitively either way. So I don't want to make a statement, as being 100% factual or whatever, and me not know definitively. But I feel it has it has to do with a kind of a mutation that causes a problem with the shedding issue. So, and then that causes the eyes to weep and get kind of yucky. And so like my hypermel here, I have to keep on its eyes all the time. I have to constantly flush them, especially when it goes in the shed. But the hets are fine. But I know there's been a lot of people that have said they have problems with the hets too. So I don't know. The hets I haven't had an issue with, but it's said that there's a problem with some of the hets as well.
It could be just some sort of like deleterious recessive allele that carries across with the gene. And then when you bring it to a northern, the northern has something that covers it up. It doesn't express.
Correct. So that's absolutely. So I don't know. Like I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on that because I'm not, because I literally haven't produced anything from those lines yet, from those animals yet. This will hopefully be the year that I do. So I can't give any like hands-on experience and say, yes, this is what happened. This is my observation. This is what I did to correct it, and have the answers. So
are you cohabiting the blue tongues?
I do. Mm-hmm. I do. Now, having said that, though, I have, again, large outdoor enclosures. They have multiple places to bask. There's no competition for food. There's no, I actually will set out 2 little plates for them instead of just one. And then I'm also, they have multiple places to bask. They have multiple places to hide. So nobody's competing. So on occasion, I do separate. But like I have the anery that I put with my bubble gum is she's something else. So I did separate them because she was being like pretty aggressive towards him. They did breed, but afterwards she's just not a nice girl. So, so I separated them. But yeah, for the most part, everybody stays together year round. I'm working on finishing up some pairings for some of my younger animals that had just woken up to kind of finalize some things. But yeah. So, and the blue tongues are interesting too, because it's not like the dragon, the dragon, you have multiple shots per year. The blue tongues, you either hit the window or you don't. It's like a boa constrictor. You either hit it or you don't. You're done. So
is that why a lot of people just leave them together then?
Most people actually don't keep them together. The blue tongues? No. Most breeders keep them. They're housing them separately. But usually those, traditionally, now it's starting to change, but traditionally they were being kept in rack systems.
Right.
So they were, their enclosures were a bit smaller to be able to accommodate 2 animals and provide them with, multiple basking points and so on and so forth. So most of the time those are housed separately and then they're brought together for breeding and then separated again. So that's not the norm to keep them and house them year round. But I've got 1.2s living in 8x4s, so they have plenty of space. So my 4x4s only have a pair, 1.1. but there's still like multi-levels, a subfloor, ramps. Yes, they use the ramps. And, so they have like little platforms that are, 2 feet up. They absolutely use them. So, yeah.
I've only ever worked with blue tongues in a cohab scenario, so that's surprises
Oh,
me.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've worked at 2 stores now, and both stores have always cohab blue tongues.
So the babies, a lot of times they'll cohab for a while. But then as, in a pet store situation, as they're sold, they'll be separated. But so this is just a general observation. Like some breeders insist on keeping the animals separate, and that, basically once the babies are now, if a bearded dragon hatches out of the ground, eggs, if they hatch, mama dragon is going after baby dragon. They don't care. Blue tongue skinks will defend their young. So you can keep your babies in with your female if you want for a time. So I go ahead and pull them though, since they're outside, and I go ahead and set them up. And plus mine are also with them. They're still with the males. So I go ahead and pull my babies right after birth. But I raise mine together. I don't raise them separately. The animals that I raise, for example, anytime, okay, if you have, say, for example, you have one in the litter that's growing a little slower, and so you have to separate them, right? So you separate that animal, but then everybody else has a buddy, or they have a couple of buddies. They may be living 3 to an enclosure, 4 to an enclosure. As they get bigger, you're separating them out. But let's say everybody's mainly 3 to an enclosure, and then you have the one that was running a little bit behind, so you separated them. The 3 that live together, if you're supplying them everything that they need, and they all have the ability to not compete with each other, and they have their basking spots and this, that, and the other, they 97% of the time they get along great, and I don't have to separate. On occasion, once obviously you see the sexes develop and you've got 2 male, obviously once you have 2 males, you're gonna have to separate them, but they grow up together really well, and they're tolerant of other animals, and they're tolerant of others in their home. So when I go to pair them up, they're tolerant of a partner, somebody being paired up with them. If that animal that was raised by itself will be typically much more aggressive towards the human, and then they're also much more aggressive towards anybody that you try to pair them with. So it's almost like being raised in solitary confinement has had a negative impact on that animal.
But there's also papers
it's
and
happened
eggs
time
as well.
and what's that?
There's also papers that have shown that in eggs, when people get a clutch of eggs from a snake and they pull the eggs apart and separate them, there's studies that look at them when they're still connected, and they communicate. The embryos communicate through the eggs, and then they have an only child syndrome thing where they're less sociable and stuff when they're raised, or if they were incubated separate. So something as simple as that affects it. I can't imagine what it's going to do with a blue tongue by itself like that.
A blue tongue that is raised by itself with little interaction is psycho most of the time. But now once you introduce that animal, I had a female that I raised by herself under a different set of circumstances, but she was raised by herself, and initially she was very intolerant, and I did put her with a male, and they're fine, and they have been together now for 3 or 4 months, and she has calmed down tremendously. But before that, she was a little fireball. The bearded dragons are like that too. So, there's this whole thing don't cohab. And as a pet keeper, I do not think you should cohab them, because it's unlikely that you're going to be providing them with the size enclosure and all of the things, and know all of the cues to look for that separation needs to occur, and so on and so forth. But when we're talking about cohabbing babies, if you're providing them with everything that they need, do really, really well together for the most part. As long as the keeper is providing everything they need. Now, if you're not, you're going to end up with nervousness. The reason they bite is because they're nervous. It's very rare that it's from a lack of food. It's typically nervousness. So If the animal is nervous, that's when it'll go on the attack of others. If you are providing that animal with everything it needs and they all have their own little basking stick, their own little spot, then those animals are calmer, and those animals are generally much more tolerant and enjoy handling more than one that may have been raised on its own. So that social interaction, whether it's coming from us or coming from its enclosure mates, makes a difference.
I kind of noticed that as well, because the only time I've ever seen like babies like ripping each other's feet off and stuff was when we walked past somewhere where it was literally a viv empty and then just newspaper at the bottom.
It's a bare floor tile or an upside down basket or whatever, and that's it. They get incredibly nervous. That is not natural for them at all. So in the wild, when they would hatch out of the ground, then, they all go scurrying up little, into a bush, for example, maybe, and they all have their own stick. So my babies, when I set them up, they have like all these little branches, right? And at night, they all pick their own stick. And so they're all like, they go to sleep on their own stick. So they're not nervous because they each have their own space. And if you're providing them with multiple basking spots and you're removing the feeling of competition, like I have to compete to survive. If you remove that, and so that the nipping thing becomes almost never, other than maybe an occasional oops, I grabbed a toe instead of a bug type of thing. But it's largely, it's gone. And when that does occur, it's usually minimal too. The problem comes is with breeders, if they get a nip, for example, they'll get maybe like a toe gets bit or something like that, and then they don't remove that animal. Then the others will look at it as a weakness for that animal, or they'll see it as being something different, and it'll trigger them to keep attacking. So that's when you see these animals that lose a foot, or they lose a full tail instead of an eighth of an inch bite off, at the very end as an oopsie, because, it was like they saw something moving and thought maybe, oh, it's a bug, and oops, that was, somebody's tail bite release, a minimal thing that can happen. But it doesn't happen often though. I get a couple a year for as many as I produce. So, and there's no way for a breeder to be able to house like bearded dragons, for example, separately, like to be able to provide housing for each animal by themselves as babies, when you have, 100 maybe that come out at once. That's not happening. So,
do you also select against that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because if you have, and that kind of goes back to like the barbs, if you have an adult that's extremely nervous, then their offspring will oftentimes be very nervous as well. And so you'll have certain traits that'll pop up. So red lines are notorious for that. Red lines are typically more aggressive than others. That's typically red lines and zeros. You'll see that more frequently than you will other bloodlines. So you see it occur more in reds and zeros. Zeros in particular. The original bloodlines for the zeros were pretty zippy. So.
What are the really, really, really like neon yellow ones?
What's that?
Do you know the really, really like yellow dragons?
I do.
Do they have any sort of like characteristic like that, where it's like increased like nippiness or anything like that?
No, they're generally pretty chill actually. The problem with the yellows is that yellow takes time to develop. Red takes time to develop too, but you typically see red pretty much right out of the egg. Yellow, most of the time, even a hypo yellow, but standard yellow really takes a long time to develop. But a hypo yellow, you'll generally see the color faster, but it's a real build over time. They don't come out of the egg like high yellow, highlighter yellow. It's a development thing. So you generally have a high demand for high yellow, but yet it's like you have to wait 6 months to get there. Like to see that high yellow, you're waiting 3, 4, 5, 6 months. You're not seeing it when they're little. So like the independent pet shops and customers that want a baby and so on and so forth, they don't understand the color potential of that animal all the time. And I get it. I mean, I'm not saying that they should understand it, but they often don't, they don't know what that animal is going to become. They don't see it because it's not there yet. So it's hard for people to envision it. So I'll have somebody contact me and they say, oh, I want a really, really high yellow animal. And so you show them an animal, it's like, but that's not yellow enough. And it's like, yeah, I understand that. That's what this is going to develop into that, but it takes a while. So the yellows are hard because there's red is always outsells yellow anyway. But the yellow takes so much time to develop their color.
That's a hard sell as well, isn't it?
It
Because
is
you
a
could
hard
hold
sell,
them back for 6 months and then wait for the colour to come in and then sell them at 6 months. But then someone's like, well, I want a baby. There's no pleasing them, really, is there?
yeah. And then dragons too are like just the reality of it. Dragons are kind of a ticking time bomb too, right? So you can only house them together for so long, like we were talking about earlier. A breeder can cohab them and cohab them responsibly and do a great job of it and not have any issue. But they come time where they figure out, oh, I'm a little boy or I'm a little girl, and you have to separate them. So and they grow very rapidly. So your housing requirements go way up, and the price point at which they're sold at, they literally have like one of the lowest profit margins of any reptile that I'm aware of. Like their profit margin for a bearded dragon is very low, and not that everything is money, because it's not, but you have to be able to. You can't lose. You can't be going backwards and lose $50 per animal. You'll go into the hole. There's no way. You can't service your customers. You can't make it. So I do this full time. This is my full-time job, but job, but I mean, it's a tremendous amount of work, but I couldn't do what I do and do a great job of it and have a full-time job. It would be impossible. I would be doing a disservice to my animals, but that's because I produce more than like 2 clutches a year, so this is something that I do full time, and I spend a lot of time on the phone with customers and answering questions and all the things. So it's just, some of it does have to be economics too. So to hold them back like that just doesn't work. It's like Paradox. When I was working with Paradox a lot, which I still produce Paradox, but I was trying to figure out really kind of how it worked, what the on-off switch was and stuff like that. And so that the Paradox, a lot of times they don't change until they hit at least shed 3, oftentimes shed 5, and sometimes beyond that. I've seen them literally where I've sold an animal and 7 months later it turns full Paradox. So, if a pairing produces 100 eggs, are you going to hold back 100 animals until they're 6 months old? It's not possible. It's just not possible. Then no. It's too much to manage. It's a disservice to the animals. It's a disservice to you. It's a disservice to your wallet too, unfortunately. So, because the power bill and all of the infrastructure, all of the caging and everything else that you have to have for those animals. So, I don't know.
Are the blue tongues a lot better for that then?
What's that?
Are the blue tongues a lot better for that?
So the blue tongues, you can't produce the numbers that you can with a bearded dragon. A pair of bearded dragons can they can actually technically produce over 200 babies in a year. It's happened, with really large bloodlines where you'll have 200 eggs come out and 100% hatch rate, and you're going to have 200 babies from that one pairing. A blue tongue, then you're going to get, 8, 12, 21, something like that. So, and they only produce once a year. So there's far fewer animals. It's a hit or miss. They either produce that year or they don't. So you're not going to produce the numbers. But I mean, you do have to separate them as they get bigger too. But it's a different numbers game. It's just different. So, I mean, any lizard that you hang on to for too long is going to be, even a crested gecko, you can only house so many per space and do it right.
Have you had many people comment on the fact that you're like mixing the blue tongues, or is it a case of they've said their bit at the beginning and now it's just custom that want the healthy pets now?
So I've had breeders that have told me that they want to get involved in the project, but they're still a little, I have people that are like, go for it. Heck yeah. Super, super excited. Like that's the vast majority of people. Then I have a few breeders that are kind of, maybe they were taught by somebody that was old school, that had more of the thought process that you have to keep the lines pure. And so they want to work on the projects, but they're nervous of what people think. So there's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of hesitancy, not because they don't think it's cool, but because they're afraid of maybe what, their mentor might think or whatever. So there's a little bit of that. And then you have people that are purists that, want to make sure that the animals stay pure. And like I said, I'm fine with that, like I respect that. So, but I'm going to do my thing and you can do your thing, and I'll have pure animals that, as much as I know them to be, I'll keep lines like that, but then I'm also going to do this. So, everybody always has different opinions about anything. I mean, you could pick any topic and everybody's, there's going to be different opinions out there. So, and that's okay.
I think you hit the nail on the head with old school and new school, because even like the idea people use like conservation, but then new school conservation considers like hybrids as a method of like dealing with reintroductions in the wild and things like that. I mean, there was a paper, I think it was over this year or last year, talking about they were experimentally hybridizing the Vietnamese and the Chinese population of the Chinese crocodile lizards to produce healthy offspring for reintroduction.
Right.
So, and it all depends upon what works in each environment, whether you get like genetic swamping or it takes away fitness from that specific environment or increases fitness. It's all like specific. So people were very much like, oh no, hybrids are bad because I read one paper on genetic swamping. Or they're like, hybrids are good because I read this paper and said there's hybrid vigor. But it's actually a very holistic bird's eye viewpoint you need to have. And it's very old school to be like, you have to keep it pure, because even new school conservation a lot of conservationists might even disagree with that.
Yeah, it's not a flat yes. When you're looking at hybridization, it's not a flat yes or no. It depends on the circumstances. So, and it depends on the animals that you're working with. What species are you working with? What are you taking it to? Like, what are you trying to hybridize it with? There's so many different parameters. There's so many, and so to just say a hard yes or a hard no doesn't make any sense, because there are certain combinations that I would be like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that, or I don't think that would even be viable. So, and you have others that will really produce very, very healthy offspring. And so in the case where you're creating hybrids to produce very healthy offspring that help to push the animals forward and give a very healthy, strong, vibrant animal, then I'm 100% for that. So yeah, it's not a cut or dry yes or no. It shouldn't be looked at that way, so I agree.
So weird, like it's similar to politics, where it's like, well, what camp do I belong to? And rather being like, my opinion on that matter is I think this, but then also on that I think this. It's like, but which cluster which grouping of I must fit that viewpoint do I belong to? I must belong, rather than I have individual opinions upon individual things, and I see the nuance. And it's almost like it's either I'm old school and it's like I'm purist and it's wrong, or it's like the other way, and there's very little in between. It annoys me a lot.
Right. And I think something that I have a tendency to do with anything in life, whether it be like the reptile industry or politics or whatever, is I have the ability to, or at least I try to have the ability to stand on the fence and look at both sides and understand, if something works, then this is good. But if in this situation, it may not be good, it may be detrimental. So you just really have to be able to look at the big picture and look at what are we talking about? Yes, we're talking about hybrids, but what about hybrids? What are you doing? What is the end goal? What are you producing? So if it's something that's of detriment to the animal, then it shouldn't be done. But if it's something that is create in a situation like conservation, where you either do it or they're gone, or you're doing it to help prevent bottlenecking and it's clear that it works, then, those are things that I think should be, that we should be able to do without anybody really getting upset about it.
I just don't think you should get upset about what someone else is doing in their collection. Like, it's very bizarre to me to be actually distraught over what someone else is doing that doesn't concern you, doesn't affect you in the slightest.
Yeah, but everybody's.
That sounds like hyperbole, but it's not, because people do get distraught over it.
Oh no, I've heard some stories from blue tongue breeders that I just made my jaw drop. That I was shocked at some of the things that they experienced or went through just because of differences in opinion or what they wanted to do in a project, or the hybrids, for example. It was just so like cut and dry that was an absolute hard no. And I mean, some extreme. It was interesting. It was very interesting. Yeah.
Still happens to this day.
Yeah. So.
Well, have you got anything that you want to ask, Kelly, before we wrap up for 2 hours?
No, I'm pretty good. Yeah.
You're just sat there stroking the dog, having a great time. I've been expecting you, Mr. Bond. Well, Heather, I know everyone's going to be listening to this and be like, okay, where do I get animals from this person? It sounds amazing. So can you let everyone know where they can come and get animals from?
Well, I'm Fairytale Dragons, and Fairytale Dragons LLC. We had some fairy tales that have now popped up all over, so I now have to say Fairytale Dragons LLC. But I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. I have a website, but I don't really use it, to be honest with you. It needs to be upgraded. I'm waiting for another reptile friend to kind of help me with that. I'm not a techie. I like working with animals. That's my superpower. So, and then I list to Morph Market, so here in the States. So, yep, that's where all of my listings go. And then everybody's, open to contact me through Messenger, through my business page on Instagram and Facebook too as well.
Do you ship internationally?
So I don't have an import-export license. I do ship to exporters in the States for species that are permitted to be exported. So, but that is not, I don't arrange that. My customers arrange that, but I do point them in the direction of various exporters. But again, that's only for species that obviously, like a bearded dragon, I can export. The Aryan Jaya blue tongues, I can, the Marukis. Right now, the Northerns and the Easterns, it's a no right now. So we'll see if that changes, but those we can't export currently.
How does it work when it's an Aryan Jaya cross?
The Aryan Giant is Indonesian. It's a Indonesian blue tongue.
Can you not cross them to the Australian?
I have, yeah.
So how does it work with the export? They're saying no to Aryan Jaya, but how does it work with an Aryan Jaya cross?
I'm going to be really honest with you. That's a gray area, and I don't know. So
you just don't play that field.
I just don't do it.
Fair.
Yeah. So if it's an Aryan Jaya, if it's an IJ, fine. If it's a Maruki, fine. If it's like, one of my hybrids, then that's not something, I'm not playing in that field until I can get some sort of clarification on that. So
fair enough. Well, it's been great having you, Heather. I always enjoy, honestly, a lot of our viewpoints of like what we want to do with a lot of our projects have come from our conversation last time. So I think a lot of people are going to listen to this one and feel the same way. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. It was good to talk to you guys again.